Hello everyone, welcome back to the Tech Sharmit podcast. Today I'm honored to introduce a very special guest, Jason Warner, who is joining us from United States. Jason is a highly accomplished developer, architect, and a community leader who holds the prestigious title of Google Developer Expert for Angular community. As a GDE, Jason has contributed a lot for this community by sharing his expertise. So, today in this episode, we will explore Jason's journey in technology, his approach to mastering new tools, best practices for clean and maintainable code, as well as his experience in leading technical communities. But before we dive in, I would like to thank Jason for joining us today in this episode. And now I request you to please initiate the discussion by telling us something about yourself.
Yeah, thank you, first of all, for having me. I've watched some of your stuff, and I really appreciate what you do for the community. I'm it. Um, yeah, um, I have two daughters, and so I guess a fun fact about me is I'm a dance dad. I go to dance competitions quite regularly,
Okay.
and spend a lot of time watching my daughters dance. Um, that's a lot of what I do outside of work.
Okay, all right. So let's start with your journey into the IT first because we all wanted to know like how things got started for you. Like how did you started into the IT industry? What were those initial few moments that motivated you to choose a career into technology? And later on like how your path unfolded.
Sure. So I actually grew up in Idaho, which is a state in northwestern United States.
Okay.
Idaho in the United States is well known for growing potatoes.
Okay.
Um, and I grew up on a potato farm, and absolutely hated it. I didn't like the early mornings. I didn't like moving wheel lines in the mud. There's just a lot of stuff I didn't like about it. So I knew I didn't want to be a farmer for the rest of my life. When I was about 8 years old, my dad got the first computer for our family, and I
Okay.
loved it. It was a TRS-80 Color Computer 2 from Radio Shack, um, and its only programming language was BASIC. So I started programming in BASIC around 8 years old. From there, I had a friend who was a programmer who gave me my first C compiler. So
Hmm.
my first language that wasn't basic was C. So I learned a lot about pointers, moved into C++. And then after high school, I started working for market research companies, helping them develop their survey engines and things like that. Um,
Okay.
and then eventually I got into the web. I've always loved the web. I've always loved front end, but um, I've worked all sorts of places. I've done embedded systems in Linux. I've done iPhone, Android. I wrote a peer-to-peer network once for a company that I worked for. And I've worked in .NET, I've worked in Java, but I always keep coming back to the web.
Okay. All right. So, like, it's very interesting to know about that. Like, you started with the basic and C language, and then
Mhm.
later on, you have worked across a wide range of technology from front end to frameworks like Angular to backend systems like .NET Core, as well as Node.js. So, how do
Mhm.
you stay current with these kind of rapid evolution of web technologies? Because we all know that things has been changed from a very rapid pace, right? So, like,
Yeah,
how you adopt the thing? Like, what's your approach of mastering the new tools?
yeah, absolutely. So curiosity is going to serve you well as you in your career. There are going to be times where you're going to feel like, hey, I'm where I need to be. I'm okay. I don't need to learn anything. Um, and I find that that's the most dangerous time because, especially now as I'm getting older and I'm working with more older devs, um, there are devs out there who find themselves being left behind. Um,
Okay.
the way you get left behind is you just become comfortable with where you are. Um, to not do that, just be curious, right? If like right now everybody's talking about AI, if you're curious about AI, figure out how to run an AI yourself, right? Figure out how to train an AI. There's tons of information out there on it, and a lot of free stuff, right? AI may require expensive graphics cards or things like that, but some of the smaller AIs don't, or um, learn the AI concepts yourselves, but don't build big AIs, with front ends. Don't be afraid to explore outside of the framework that you're learning, or even the language that you're learning. I spend a lot of time writing and reading Angular code with work.
Okay.
So when I go look for, maybe things to watch on YouTube or other places, maybe
Mhm.
I'll watch Python. Um, Maybe I'll learn about how React does something instead of Angular, or how Vue does something. Um,
Okay.
and it just it helps you, one, take a different look at how your framework does things, but two, it helps spark that curiosity and gives you ideas of where to go explore.
Okay. All right. So, as we can see that everyone has to go through some challenges as well, like whenever
Mhm.
learning or switching to from one technology to another technology. And you often mention that you enjoy problem solving
Mhm.
aspect of the development. So, could you please share any of your memorable challenge that you have faced while either transitioning from one technology to another, or maybe to learn something new? So like what was that challenge and how you overcome that situation?
Yeah, yeah. So when I first um was moving you know, um out of Windows-based programming into more web-based programming,
Okay.
I really struggled with the concept of a single thread in the web.
Okay.
And I wanted to try to move things off of the main thread. And I
Mhm.
kept trying to do that over and over. It really, really, really frustrated me. Um,
Okay.
that as I was writing code, quite often my UIs would just freeze. Um, right. And my web pages would just freeze. And it really took a long time for me to understand that um, there are different ways to do things. Browsers will handle things differently, and I didn't need to be trying to control everything. That
Correct.
instead I could allow the browser to do it. Um, and I was so frustrated. There were a lot of times where I was ready to just give up on JavaScript, and I was ready to call it a toy language and all the stuff, all the bad things that you hear about it, right?
Right.
Um, there, there's I'm a persistent person. I once had a boss. I went into him and I was like, I don't know if I can solve this problem. Um, we were working on some software and I was struggling. I couldn't come up with a solution. And my
Mhm.
boss just said, "Give it 2 days, you'll solve it." Um, he's like, That's just the kind of person you are." He's like, "You can't put things down," and that's one. It's both a detriment and a benefit to me is that I don't put things down. Sometimes problems will interfere with my sleep, things like that. So, my brain was constantly working on it. Eventually, I figured out, how to handle rendering. I figured out web workers. I figured out all sorts of things like that. Um, but persistence, um, you know, it takes a lot of persistence in our field, especially when you're new. Um,
Yes.
I I went to some college for electrical engineering, but I didn't finish my degree. I worked for a company that liked to find people who were juniors or seniors in college and then work them so hard that they would drop out. And that's what
Okay.
happened to me. I never finished my degree. Um, so that early grind in programming is tough. Um,
Yes.
when you're trying to get your foot in the door, it's incredibly tough. And everybody has their struggles, right? But that early grind, is where you're going to learn persistence. And quite often, persistence and consistency are the key to success. A lot of
Agree.
there are a lot of very, very smart people out there. Um, and the ones that will be successful are the ones that will be persistent, right? They aren't willing to give up. Um, and they're consistently delivering similar levels of quality over and over again. So yeah, that's my suggestion. Just learn to be persistent. Learn to um, learn to follow things through. Learn to complete things. And
Right.
sometimes you'll fail, and that's okay. Let yourself fail, right? You're going to fail. I fail all the time. I still do. Um, and being honest with yourself, realizing you're going to fail, allowing yourself to fail, but most importantly, learn from those failures. Um,
Yes.
and next time, do a little bit better. Maybe you'll fail over and over and over again, but that one success will be important. And just keep picking yourself up, right? Like they say in the Batman movie, why do we fall down? To pick ourselves
Yes.
back up, right? Um, so I think about that line quite a bit. But yeah.
Yes, I completely agree with this point that yes, persistence and consistency is the key of success, because if you are consistent in learning something every day, like you are trying to explore new thing, you will fail. That's quite fair. Like everyone has to go through the challenges. Whether like you all can see that Jason, who is holding the prestigious title of GD, but he still agrees that yes, every day like we have to fail and we have to learn something new. So that's not a big task, and we all have to go through it. So, and if you are consistent in learning something, for sure, like one day you will achieve whatever your plans are there or whatever roadmap you want to follow. All right. Okay, so Jason, like we all know that database technology are also a crucial part of the modern applications, and you have worked
Hmm.
with both SQL as well as NoSQL databases, so,
Hmm.
as well as some of the unconventional systems like InterSystem Cache. So, how do you decide like which database technology to use for a given project? Like, is there any particular approach that you follow, or what is your philosophy on that?
Um, it's evolved over the years.
Okay.
I'll tell you that. So early on, I used to just do SQL databases, right? And NoSQL, NoSQL, right?
Mm-hmm.
Was where I would be all the time because it was free. And then I started exploring like NoSQL databases.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then I had a job where I was working with an even stranger database known as PIC.
Okay.
And PIC is a card-based database. And so it used attribute marks to mark different columns in the card. It was a very strange database. Then we moved to InterSystems Cache.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the reality of modern databases is that quite often your choice doesn't matter until it does. And what do I mean by that? In the beginning, you could pick a NoSQL or a SQL database and probably get similar results. Um,
Yeah.
but once your database starts to scale, that's where the decisions will matter. And that's where having experience with all sorts of types of database will come into play. For
Mm-hmm.
example, InterSystems Cache is a red-black tree database that's self-balancing. And so it's very, very fast to look up and retrieve data, but its indexes can get very, very big. Um,
Okay.
and it allows you to query using SQL and its own custom languages and things like that. It's going to be very, very fast for consuming data and retrieving data, but sometimes ACID compliance can be difficult, right?
Right.
Um, and so when you're looking at your application, in the beginning, you're going to be tempted to just go with a popular technology.
Mm-hmm.
Um, my suggestion is think about what is your data going to look like in 5 years? What is your data going to look like in 10 years?
Yeah.
Um, is fast retrieval going to be your key? Then maybe look at something that retrieves data very, very quickly.
Okay.
Um, is storing data going to be like keeping records of data together? Similar to like document style. Then maybe you want a
Yeah.
document style database, right? But um, when you're getting your application off the ground, quite often, whatever gets you to market fastest is going to be a
Mm-hmm.
good decision. And at that point, what you want to do is build your software so that it interacts with your database in a way that you can replace that later. Because down the road, you're going to encounter things that you didn't think about when you were first designing, right? So when you're first
Right.
designing, go with what you know. That's right. You're going to be most successful using what you know. Um, but always build your software with pieces to be replaceable. So if
Correct.
your database becomes a problem, um, if you can replace your database, then you can have a team work on a solution with the current version of, problems that you're coming up against. Maybe what you chose doesn't scale well. Maybe what you chose doesn't store the data in a way that you can pick it up. Um, and that's the way that I think you should pick most tech tools. Um,
Yeah.
Go with what you understand, and then when it doesn't solve the problems, um, have your software written in such a way that you can replace it, right? Um,
Correct.
Frameworks, sometimes that doesn't work, right? Like replacing Angular with React is going to be difficult. Replacing React with Vue is going to be difficult, right? Um, so there are some decisions that are much more impactful, but quite often your database, it is important. It is impactful. You should definitely, with your current knowledge, pick what you think is best for what you understand, but
Mm-hmm.
then look to the future, right? Um,
Right.
so also don't get tied to any don't get tied to any one technology. Um,
Okay.
and this is something that so as a junior engineer, I was very passionate on forums. And I think that
Okay.
passion is important. Um,
Yeah.
you'll see junior engineers often arguing frameworks, or arguing databases, or arguing technologies, right?
Right.
Um, that's good. That shows that you love what you're doing and you're passionate about it. Um,
Correct.
at some point, you need to evolve, and understand that you're just using tools. And
Yes.
that's when you start building up your tool chain and your tool belt. And maybe to use front end frameworks, maybe React solves this problem really, really well. Maybe you should pick it, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Maybe Angular solves this problem really, really well. Maybe you should pick it. Maybe Vue solves this problem better than both Angular and React. You should pick
Correct.
it, right? Understanding um, understanding that everything we do in software is tools, and at some point, the theory behind the software is more important than the actual language or technology being used.
Correct. Yeah. Yes, like this is the same point where I'm completely agree with you because uh first thing we should know about the requirement. If
Hmm.
requirement is clear, then it would be bit easier for us to decide which tool we want to use because every tool has their own capabilities, right? and
Hmm.
according to this requirement, it would be much easier for us to select and go for a particular technology. So that's a good thing.
Correct. Well,
And
and sometimes
mhm,
I want to make the point that at points in your career, your requirements are not going to be clear. Or even if they seem clear, you may not have the full picture. You may think that your requirements are a certain thing, but after your users start using it, you realize, oh no, our
it was not
requirements are
that
something different, right?
correct.
Um,
Yeah,
that's where understanding software theory, right? And maybe you need to build some facades. Maybe you need to build some bridge patterns, right? Maybe you need,
correct.
um, maybe you need some decor. Who knows, right? All the different patterns for building software. Understanding the theory behind that, that allows you to go, "Ooh, we made a mistake here. Let's pull this piece out and let's replace it with something else." Um, that's where the real value in a software engineer is, right? Knowing Angular is important for companies that build Angular, but
Yeah,
there are a lot fewer companies that build Angular than React. So should I learn React, right? Um, or maybe at some point, once you understand, have a strong grasp on software, and writing software, um, I think you're better served learning theory behind software, um,
yeah,
learning design patterns, learning things like domain-driven design,
correct.
learning things like onion architecture. You know, things like that are applicable universally, whether the language is Java, JavaScript, Python, who knows what. Um,
Correct.
having that deeper knowledge will allow you to transition into new areas, and be a big help to you in your career.
Agree. Okay. And apart from selecting these kind of technologies or framework, another important thing is writing a clean as well as reusable code, because this is a key for a long time project success.
Hmm.
Because the thing that you are writing will be reviewed or maybe modified by, and for sure it would be modified by many other developers who will be working on that project. So,
Hmm.
what are your principle or practices that do you follow to ensure that your code is maintainable as well as scalable, especially when working with the large teams? So, what
Yeah,
practices do you follow?
absolutely. We've all had that moment where you go into a piece of code and you're like, oh, this is the worst code I've ever seen. Who wrote this? Who could possibly have written this? So you go back through the Git history and it was you, right?
Right.
Um,
Correct.
the reality is we should be improving every day.
Yes.
And if I don't think that the code that I wrote a year ago is bad code, I probably haven't improved over that year.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so what do we do to keep improving, right? Like incremental improvement is always better than trying to make a big bang change because it's
Correct.
difficult to think differently one day to the next. But if we just make a small change, a small tweak here and there, we're going to get better. A lot
Mm-hmm.
of people like to use solid and beat you over the head with solid. Solid has some good ideas, and I think solid is a good framework to think around. But um, a lot of principles in solid are misunderstood. People will hit you over the head with the SRP, right? Single responsibility principle over and over in code reviews when they may not even understand themselves what SRP means.
Mm-hmm.
Um, learn the principles. I actually prefer Cupid to solid. It's a
Okay.
similar framework, but it's designed and it works better with functional code, which a lot of JavaScript is written in a functional manner, right?
Right.
Um, Solid works really, really well in an object-oriented environment, and is the one that everybody's familiar with. My My way of improving is I'm always looking at code, whether I'm reviewing somebody else's code or whether I'm looking at my own code, and
Mm-hmm.
could I do this better?
Yeah.
Absolutely, I could do it better. Every piece of code I've ever written, I could write better. When you're working for a company, you need to realize that perfection is kind of a swamp. And what I mean by that is if you start going down the road of perfection, it's going to suck you in more and more and more, and you're going to get slower and slower and slower. Um, so you need to be looking at releasing code. I'm not saying write bad code,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm also saying don't get bogged down in arguing minutia. Don't get bogged down in arguing perfection. Write code that's good, um, but that gets the problem done. Um, with the intention of coming back. So how do we do that in a way that we don't create a big ball of mud like they write about in the domain-driven design world, right?
Right.
Where everything's just randomly thrown together. We need to be intentional. And this goes back to understanding theory, right? How software is put together. Um, instead of directly accessing something, maybe write an abstraction, right? Maybe you've got a bridge between two pieces of software.
Yeah.
Maybe you write a translation layer between something that comes to your API and something that comes inside, inside of your application. Um,
Correct.
um, and don't be afraid to suggest those things, but you need to know what those things are. So spend your time reading good code, and even in code that everybody says is good, you're going to find places where you could improve it,
Improve. Yeah.
right? Your experiences are different from mine, and you're going to see stuff in my code that I do wrong. I'm going to see stuff in your code that you do wrong.
Correct.
Um, but it it doesn't mean we need to instantly go in and fix it, right? I was just talking with somebody recently. They called it the campground rule. In the clean code, they call it the Boy Scout rule, where you leave the code better than you found it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
if you're in code and you can make something better, and it doesn't lead to a large testing effort, that's the other thing on large teams, right? Is your small change could wind up translating into big costs
Correct.
elsewhere, right? So understanding, yes, I could make this change, but then QA has to get involved. Then we have to do a regression. Then we have to write patch notes. Then we have to write. You could be causing more work than you really think by making small
Yeah.
changes. So when you encounter stuff, document it. Create a ticket in your ticket system that says, "Hey, I encountered this. Let's fix it," and get it prioritized. Right. Then the team is expecting that, and the resources are there. Um, how do you avoid situations like that? Um, experience, right?
Yes.
Um, eventually, over time, you learn that if I write software that's very, very tightly coupled,
Mm-hmm.
where this class knows about that class, and I'm not following good abstraction, I'm not following um, good practices in designing my software. I'm not following good encapsulation. Um, your code becomes brittle and breaks. Learn from that, right? Next time, don't build that tight coupling. Figure out how do I break that coupling, right? Maybe I
Yeah.
use dependency injection, right? Maybe I build um, something that allows me to indirectly access it. Um,
Yes.
maybe I invert the dependency. Who knows how I do it, right?
Correct.
Um, but you'll learn these over time, and find a good mentor, somebody who's
Yes.
been in software for a long time. Um, they'll have good stories to tell, I promise. I've got plenty of stories to tell, and I can tell you why I think the way I do, because I've got the scars to prove that I went through that battle. So yeah.
Okay. Although, like, there are many things that we can discuss here in this podcast, but as we have limited time, so I would like to ask
Hmm.
my last question. And as you just mentioned about the mentors, because we all know that mentors and key people influences impact our journey a lot. So I just
Mhm.
want to know, like, who were the key people who guided, inspired, and supported you in throughout your journey?
Yeah, very early on, it was my parents.
Hmm.
So as a kid, I uh, we grew up as farmers. We didn't have a lot of money. So for Christmas, I was asking for tech books.
Okay.
So while others were getting toys, I was asking for, the latest programming language or the latest
Okay.
book on that programming language. As time went on, um, I had some great mentors. One of my early managers, his name was Pete Van Monfrans. Very, very impactful mentor for me. Um,
Okay.
as we move forward, Ty Brewer, Owen Meekum, Doug Golder, um, were very helpful in shaping my career.
Hmm.
Moving forward from there, you know, there's a lot of people in the Angular community who have been a big help. So people like Manfred Steyer, Brandon Roberts, Chow Tran. Chow has been incredibly impactful in
Okay.
where I am right now. Um, and I hate mentioning names because I know I've forgotten people. Um,
Good.
and as I say that phrase, like five more people pop into my head, but we've got limited time.
Yes. Right.
And those came to mind first. There are a lot of other people out there. Um, and I appreciate everybody who's helped. Um,
Okay. All right. So thank you so much, Jason, for joining us in this episode and for sharing so much information about Angular and your journey. It was really very nice talking with you, and I hope you also enjoyed the discussion.
Thank you very much, Amit. It was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.